but thank you all for tuning in. Paul and myself would love to welcome you all here, as well as on the videos. And really what we're trying to do today is something hopefully we can carry on doing, which is really, PMD and SKD need to be joined at the hip in the new world if we can really deliver. And you should be able to interchange Paul and myself on the whole side of delivery and future direction around the operations side of things. So we thought it'd be really useful to actually have a town hall that brought us all together and actually gave a chance for Paul and myself to be able to talk to you together rather than in different rooms in different silos, because actually, we do work very well together and we need to work even better together as departments and as individuals. And so this is a chance for us to try and do it collectively. Paul and myself have been traveling quite a lot, so our wonderful advisors have at least set up the initial agenda, but what we really want is a conversation this morning. And in that initial agenda, Paul was going to kick off and I was going to follow up. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Paul.
Thanks, and I'm going to just check my time so I don't talk too long. So we just decided we'd cover a few topics. And so let me start with the EFAD 2.0 paper and where things are going with that. So hopefully you've looked at it, it's online. And the latest round of activities is to do a series of papers that will feed into the EFAD 2.0 papers. Broadly, they can be divided into a certain set of papers. So the first are on the financial side. We have the issues of the debt sustainability framework. We want to potentially borrow more either from sovereign sources or from the market. We have to think about pricing. So if we borrow from the market, what should pricing look like? We have the underlying way that we manage our assets and liquidity. So there's going to be a series of papers along those lines that are going to be done. There's papers that are going to be done or are being done on the impact fund, on the private sector window, on the mission and vision of EFAD. And all of those are being done by PMD and SKD jointly. So we have a group that's working on those, and we have those papers coming as well. There's a series of papers on the demand for EFAD projects. Those papers are one's being done by the Center for Global Development. They're looking at when you shift from IDA to IBRD and your terms harden, so it's like a natural experiment. You jump from lower interest to higher interest. What happens to borrowing? And one of the things they find is that people tend to borrow more for harder things like infrastructure. So what are the implications for us if we start lending on ordinary terms to more countries? Will they want different types of projects and financial products? And so that's one paper. We're analyzing our own internal data to do something similar. And then we have a grant to look more broadly at demand for the types of projects that EFAD does. I think there was a competition and ODI, I think, emerged. Soledad's nodding her head, so I guess that's correct. And so they will go and look to 20 to 30 countries and ask very detailed questions about the types of things that we want. All three of those papers will then ultimately have a demand paper will come out of that. Then there's papers on the grants. If you look at our financing, if you take DSF, the amount put there is 600 million or something like that. If you look at our budget, 160 million, and you look at the grants, and you add all that up, it's $1 billion. Our replenishment is $1 billion. So right away, the amount we get in replenishment is taken away by things that we're not going to get paid back on. So if you work it out, then slowly our assets are going to go down and we're going to be digging a hole. And so we need to do something about that. And so one is to resolve the DSF issue, so there's papers on that. But another is to figure out about the grants and what we might do. So there's a paper being written on how the grants might be reformed, including the possibility of lowering the amounts from 6.5% to lower so we don't have a hole in there. There's paper on HR. If we're going to get bigger over the next 10 years, then we need more staff. but we don't need a linear increase in staff, meaning we increase everywhere. We should increase in the areas that are most important, potentially in PMD and SKD, but we also have to think of the skills mix we might need. If we do more infrastructure, do we need different kinds of staff to do that? We also probably need more finance and legal because changing the financial model. So these are the things we need to think about. And then there's another set that ERG is doing, including the supply of potential funds. For the impact fund in the private sector window, we hope foundations, the private sector, provide funds. Realistically, can we expect them to do that? There's a new communication visibility strategy that we're working on, sets of key countries that they're working on. And I think that's all of them. So that's enough, though, I promise you. So by Monday next week, there's supposed to be annotated outlines for all of those papers. Then next Friday, a week from tomorrow, EMC will meet again and check to make sure the papers have the types of background we want. And then drafts of the papers are expected towards the end of the month. And then a new version of EFAD 2.0 will be written in August. The plan is that by October, we have a decent EFAD 2.0 paper that has the vision for the next 10 years so that we can give it to the board for reflection. Assuming they agree on most things or they modify it in some way, this will form the foundation for EFAD 12. So we'll make sure that we're building the basis for the 3-year period, but thinking in terms of the 10-year period. Okay, so that's the EFAD 2.0. There'll be a chance to answer questions in a minute, and I already take half my time. On the portfolio and the PDTs. So just last week, a list of all the PDT members, the PTLs, and the members of the PDTs has been sent to PMC. If you look at that list, it's completely unrealistic. There's no way those staff can do all that work. So the question is how we're going to deal with that. So one of the things we're doing is we're calculating how much time it takes to be a PTL, how much time it takes to be a member of a PDT. What's the cost in terms of time? Given the workload, how many people would we expect? How many people do we have? And to try to figure out for the midterm review, what for the budget actually for next year, what we would realistically need. Now, of course, they're not going to give us all of that. So we're going to have to make some decisions and prioritization on how we do things. And so we have to make decisions on, do we focus mostly on design? Do we focus on, in terms of SKD's participation? Do we focus on supervision? If we focus on all of supervision, which part of it should we focus on? Should it be, we had a discussion yesterday about the importance of startup workshops and where to go. We've also heard that a lot of supervision focuses around financial elements, so maybe that's not necessary. Do we focus on problem projects? So there's a series of questions we're going to have to answer over the next couple months based on that information and what we can do with that. Okay, then the last area I was going to talk about before turning it over to Donald is the mainstreaming themes. As you know, we have all these EFAD 11 commitments linked to the mainstreaming themes. Those are being operationalized. In effect, we need to measure them, and we need to make sure that we're meeting the targets that we're having. Ultimately, everything has to come down to the project basis. And remember, this is the principle we set up in the development effectiveness framework, right? We have core indicators in all of the projects. Those core indicators then have to aggregate up into our corporate reporting. And when OPR led this reform of the core indicators, we reduced dramatically the number of indicators. And we also tried to get them much more focused. So now within those, we need to make sure that the mainstreaming areas are covered. And so there's been lots of discussions between OPR, who ultimately runs this, but who needs the technical support of ECG about how to actually do this. And we're finally coming to some end on that, although I've seen some emails about women's empowerment that we probably need to sit down and talk about that still need to be resolved. The one difference in all of that is the climate finance. It's not just, are you doing something or do you have an approach? It's actually financial. You have to say how much money there is. Now, we've had also attempts to measure how much money we spend. So RIA did this because we had to for the impact assessments PTA in the past and now PMI also managed a set of a dashboard that in effect took data and said, this is how much we spend on irrigation, livestock, et cetera. And so we need to have that kind of information. We're asked it all the time. And again, this is all being consolidated in OPR. Sorry, Joe. But there's some slight differences between what PMI and RE have done, but OPR has been working to try to figure that out. Now, the climate finance, again, has to be embedded within all of that. So you have the project level division of how money is being spent, and you have to factor in how climate is being spent there. And ultimately, that would aggregate up to check to see whether we're doing things at the aggregate level properly. So provided we can get those systems working, and I know also we had the shift to ORMs and all the other, so lots of moving parts at once has made this quite challenging. But ultimately, that's what we should try to get to. And the teams have been working well together to try to do that. So I think I'll turn over to Donald.
Thank you. So yeah, I was going to pick up on a few things too. The first one was, if you haven't heard it already, you all need to take note that the 2020 budget process is about to kick off. And from particularly, I think, the point of view of PMD and SKD, we learned a lot of lessons in 2019, and we're keen to do much better in 2020. Now, the key thing for us is that we have an opportunity now to try and at least get reasonable high-level hub plans in place to drive the budgeting. I think one of the things last year was trying to actually sequence decentralization has changed everything. And I think quite a lot of the corporate processes and ways of doing things didn't necessarily realize that they had to change too. And so what we're trying to do this year is ensure that if decentralization is to be effective, then corporate processes need to adjust and be thought through. And one of the key ones is the budget. Paul and my vision is that budget for operations needs to be driven out of good hub plans, and these are cross-departmental, these are not departmental plans, and budgets, particularly for operations, have to be seen across departments, not within departments, or we can't actually budget properly. So we had an attempt at it last year. We were missing many staff, including directors. It was definitely imperfect. And then, of course, the hub planning process kicked in afterwards. So what we're trying to do with OSB this year and also with FMD is ensure that we start with a process of trying to do at least a reasonable attempt at a hub plan of the key elements of a hub plan, particularly the design, the supervision, the concepts, which can drive the main costs. And then we can build on that so that the 2020 budgets, are properly done in that way. So we end up with a kind of a collective budget for operations. And as I say, and I think the difference this year is we are keen that FMD's budget is part of that process, not just SKB. What is needed to deliver at a hub level across the board on the POLG. So I had a meeting, yet another meeting with OSB yesterday. I think Paul's got one today, certainly SKD, to try and ensure we've got this. And certainly OPR and my front office have been meeting across departments and different bits of EFAD to try and ensure that the corporate centre understands that we have to try and do this differently and they have to support us in it. And we're getting some very good support from OSB. But you're going to have to bear with us. As ever, it always happens over the summer. We can't change that, I'm afraid. I would like to change that because I know from my first experience last year, you're trying to do it over a period, everyone's sort of away, and only certain people have a certain lot or not. But that's a fact of life. But I think what I did take away was there's a lot we can even do today to prepare for this. It will come to the EMC next week when it's signed off. It will kick off. But the new hub process, planning process and budget, should be driven, for example, on the operations side by the information you've got in GRIPS. So you now today need to go and check your information is right, because if we're using that to automatically generate what's happening, don't come back and complain if it doesn't capture what you think. So, there are things we can do right now. Ensuring that budget assistants are properly trained in the new system, we can do right now. OSB assure me that that they are putting on courses all the time, so there is no reason why people shouldn't be trained. My view would be, if you think someone should be trained, get them trained. And if you think they might need a buddy, get the buddy trained too, because, they could be away over the summer. And OSB say they will ensure that we've got that capacity. So, that's kicking off. It will, officially come to the EMC next week, but I wouldn't wait till next week, and it will go over that period, because if we get this right, it could be really powerful, and it is the future of what EFAD, the way EFAD needs to work, certainly on an operational level. The second thing, which I keep going on about, and I will again today, is project quality. Paul talked a bit about, some of the targets and the commitments we made in EFAD 11. We did okay in EFAD 10. We could have done better, but I think what I've noticed coming in here is we have to be much more proactive on the current portfolio. We need to identify issues early. We need to take action. I'm afraid I just don't subscribe to these are just government projects and we're hands off. I'm afraid we have equal responsibility for putting things on track. That's part of our job. And it's clear that, for example, there is a small number of projects which drive down our results. There are also regions which are more challenging than other regions. We're gonna continue to focus on that side of things. But one of the things I've taken away as well is we need to get the right balance between design and implementation. We put a lot of emphasis on design, and from what I've noticed, less emphasis on the implementation. You can't. Implementation is what will drive the results we get, not design. Design is important. If you start with a bad design, you shoot yourself in the foot before you start. But if you don't really focus on the implementation. So one of my key messages today, and this is for all of us, because it's not about PMD, we're all responsible, as Paul was saying on this process, is really we have to look at the current portfolio, because what will shape the results for EFAD 11 is what these projects are doing now. And if they're not performing well now, we can't wait till they close and say, oh, well, we missed the opportunity. So it's a real focus on the current portfolio and making sure that's there. And we're all in this, as Paul says, and I think something I've noticed coming in, there's been, particularly on implementation, a significant emphasis on the financial management aspects, rightly, but we need to also look at some of those other ones. It's not just about financial management, and so we need to continue to do that. And I'm also, as Gilbert said in a couple of of his town hall meetings, I'm keen we also look at some of the metrics again a year in, because certainly if you look at the ride, the ride will be going to the EMC next week. What's really apparent is the regional variations because of the difference in the context of the sorts of countries, you get, in places like WCA or NEN, the fragility and so on, and making sure we've got the staffing right on that side of things. And Paul has talked a bit about mainstreaming and, how crucial. I mean, I think if we're honest, we're saying we're behind the curve, we're 6 months into EFAD 11, a lot of front loading, a lot of projects, we're still trying to finalize this, but we've really got to get it right. And this is so key. And I think probably the thing the board is most interested in is the aspects that are covered by the mainstreaming side of things. So again, for EFAD 11, we need to get that right. Just a quick word on UN reform, which maybe if you sit at the centre, you sort of feel does not mean anything to you. But I think I wouldn't underemphasize the importance that UN reform will have on EFAD and our business. I mean, EFAD is about, it's POLG. That's what the money comes for, and that meets the real world at country level. The UN reform process, particularly, is having an impact at country level. We need to engage in it. It's very positive, but we need to also ensure that we help by engaging, steering it in the right direction at a practical level, so it helps the work of all EFAD staff at country level. And we're still looking at that. There is some draft guidance about how we need to interact with it, particularly with the new version of the UNDAFs, the UN Sustainable Development. I can't remember the rest of it, I'm afraid. But neither could Gilbert when he said we all needed to be able to say it. So I thought, well, but we need to get our balance right. We need to be seen as positive, but it is something that everyone is going to have to really engage in. I think it's really good. I can't see him in the room, but with Ron coming in as the new director of GPR, having someone with really strong operational experience who in many ways is the director responsible for the UN reform process is going to be very helpful for us, because he's got very relevant experience. And the other bit in there is RBA collaboration. I think we've made a step change in that over the last year or two. We've got a long way to go, but it is something which, again, we will be held more and more accountable to. The lessons learned exercise, or the early lessons learned exercise, I think there will be a later lessons learned exercise when we've had more chance to take stock, which many of you participate in. I think threw up a lot of useful lessons. CDI have produced an action plan. FSU and CDI have been tasked to coordinate, the action plan, and departments have been asked to identify focal points, look at their main responsibilities in the action plan. I think there's 42 actions in it. It affects us all. So we'll be looking together at how we support that over the process. And obviously one issue which is raised the whole time is administrative support in the hubs. We're going to have to look at how we deal with that in the 2020 budgets, in the hub plans, but also as a key aspect of ensuring we respond to the issues you've all raised. But that's something over the next period that we'll be spending quite a lot of time in. And then just lastly, I wanted to put on everyone's agenda that certainly sitting there as chair of track 2 on the project design and review process, it's clear to me, as I'm sure it's clear to all of you who have to come in on the design review process, that it's a new process. Like any new process, it's got many strengths, but we can also improve it. So we want to, we've been talking to Quag about having, again, a bit of an early lessons learned on the design and review process, and making sure we can learn the lessons now and not wait. So for example, I sit there and I know you all feel it, whether you're a PTL or whether you're a country director or you're part of the design team, comments come in from everywhere. Do we need all these comments? How can we streamline that review process? And another interesting thing, which was very apparent to me, was Quag do their rating, at the time these projects go to the board. Now, Quag's internal rating was that only 2/3 of projects at the end of design score 4 or more. So if you turn that way, the other way round, 1/3 of our projects are not moderately satisfactory or better at the end of design, which to me is completely unacceptable. But of course, we don't know that until the very end of the process, which is why we need a better way of tracking through the design review process, the areas that really are doing, are scoring very highly, and those areas we need to improve on, and we need to be able to track that through it. And we've got the development effectiveness matrix. It's not being used well enough So we need to be able to ensure, I mean, I think it needs a little bit of tweaking. I think it's very good, but it is quite comprehensive and quite long. But we need to ensure something like that is being used so we can see from concept note stage through where the areas are that we really need to focus on, and what we need to focus on and what's good enough. So we have a process that we're not waiting until things go to board to decide whether they're good enough or not. But I think there's also, as I say, an opportunity in this process to be able to make it less painful at times and more efficient. So we want to do a little bit of work on that process, and hopefully it will help everyone in the process too, as well as end up with better projects at the end of it. So they were just a few things that I wanted to add. So Paul, I think we should just open up now. We've got plenty of time. It's always that case that really, and I learned it very, very early on with the video thing, when I'm on the end of the video, is you feel slightly like you're a passive participant. And I don't have a screen in front of me, so I can't see anyone who's waving. But if we start at least with all of you at the end, and I see Vietnam already waving, and we'll take some questions from the offices. That'd be great. Thank you. Take some questions from the offices, preferably all for Paul. But then we do have Thuraya, regional directors, and Jill in the room. And I'm trying to see, I can't see Margarita. But anyway, we have the expertise in the room that may be able to give you the right answer if we don't give it to you. So I'm going to probably have to sort of move my chair and look that way to see the screen. So we'll start with Thomas and Vietnam. You don't need to introduce yourself, by the way. I think we know who you are.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Donald and Paul, for the introduction and the remarks. I have a couple of comments on point by point on the papers on the IFA 2.0 that will be produced, and also the second version of IFA 2.0. Is there any consultation process with the staff worked out, and how would that work? Because I had a bit the feeling the distribution of the first version of IFA 2.0 and the consultation was a little bit rushed and not really consultative, to put it in this way. On the issue that Paul raised on the finding that there is not enough staff for PTLs and participating in design and supervision, that doesn't come as a surprise, I suppose. That's easy to calculate, and I was wondering, or one could wonder why that was not considered when the new processes were actually designed. Okay, one is always smarter in hindsight, but actually looking back in history, we had a pretty good approach with the CPMT, in my personal view. That is not corporate view, but in my personal experience, where we had, and it was good because we had 1 or 2 or 3 people that were continuously working with the CPM at that time on a country program. So maybe that could be elements of the CPMT approach could be maybe used in order to address this bottleneck of having sufficient PTLs doing the job. On the budget for implementation and supervision, I'm very pleased to hear that we refocus or rebalance between design and implementation. But I think we need also to look a little bit at the financial side. Some 8 years ago, I think we had a budget for supervision which was in the range of $50,000. Now we have half of it, and we need to deliver more and better. That seems to me a very bit out of balance. What you put in, you get out, is an old saying, right? On the UN reform, I think that's certainly very much welcome on everybody's desk and mind. And we engage already as the country directors and hub directors on a daily basis with the UN. But I feel personally a little bit left alone. To give you examples, there's a recent decision from the UN in New York that we should pass, I think, our country strategies and investments plan or work plans through the RC, and I assume, which I cannot confirm 100%, also our projects. So how does its process go? And what is the guidance and the delegation of authority from headquarters? I had a recent, I think a few weeks ago, I was asked to provide information on staff and on budget and so on and so forth. Am I allowed to disclose those things? And to what extent? Of course, I like to be proactive, but I think we need also some guidance, not only in draft, but very quickly some guidance on this, because the process is ongoing and takes shape more and more. On the DRM and on the learning during the design.
One more, Thomas, and then we'll move and let someone else have a chance.
Yeah, that's my last one. On the lessons learned from DRM and design. If I recall the last process or procedures we had with QE and QA was addressing exactly what you're saying. Having an early learning and improvement of the design, that was QE, quality enhancement, before we actually go in a second step. And we are missing this step now. That would be my contribution to that. Thank you.
Thank you. And I would encourage, I'm looking around there, I see hopefully a number of other colleagues, and we have a conversation with everyone, including SKD staff as well at there. Because certainly places like Egypt and Kenya look like full offices. So please, it doesn't just have to be country directors who are speaking. The crowd that are helping me see who's waving say Ethiopia next. So Ethiopia, please, and give a nice show, good wave so we can see you if you want to speak. We'll take 3 or 4 sets of questions and then we'll try and answer them. Thank you, Ethiopia.
Good morning, everybody in Rome. Thank you very much, Donald and Paul, for a good introduction and a very informative presentation. I want to quickly only speak to very few points. Paul raised the issue of where and how best use SKD stuff, and balancing between design and implementation. I believe really our internal stuff should be prioritized really for design, midterm reviews and project completion, because these are the main learning points during the project cycle. And this way we can ensure that during the designs we really maximize the input within our corporate learning and so on, and against our corporate priorities. I think a design really has to be driven as much as possible by IFAD staff, whereas for supervision and implementation support, we can continue to look for the required resources on the market. Another aspect to this is very often, problem projects are not really driven by the technical issues, but a lot, mostly by managerial issues and so on, so implementation-related issues, and this is not really the priority capacity that we have in SKD. But after all, I would hope that with all this thinking and budgeting and rebalancing, we would still allow for the sufficient flexibility so that country teams really can lead the budgeting process based on the priorities of our clients. Another request I would ask for this upcoming budget process, as soon as possible, if you could share with us the templates that are being prepared, so that we can get our head around really what information is required and so on, and engage with our counterparts in SKD, so that we address some of the challenges we had last time when preparing plans. My last point is on design quality. And, you know, the point that Donald made with regard to 1/3 of the projects being not even moderately satisfactory at the completion of the design process. I think here I was myself also managing 2 design processes at the moment for Ethiopia, a little bit in a limbo, because on the one hand, you emphasized the need for quality, but we were not given very much clarity on how we measure this quality. And I think it came out, I mean, my takeaway at the time was, okay, it has to be very much data-driven, lessons-driven, and so on, and we tried to work in this context and so on. And but I think along the lines that Thomas says, it will be useful to early in the process have this conversation about what are the key issues in the design process that the country teams have to refocus on, so that we can address these. And then I think, I mean, now we have 3 major review points: the OSC, the DRM, and then the final QUAC review. Prior to these review points, we have the regional team of the division review it, then the regional director. So we get about 9 sets of comments, and each time you submit the documents, you get a different set of comments. So very much welcome your question whether all these comments are really necessary, or I think it is all about focusing really on the key issues and really drive the designs by key issues that drive quality. Thank you very much.
I don't know if anyone in headquarters has seen any more hands waving for me. Okay, Côte d'Ivoire, please, and then we'll try and give you some responses, and we can put all directors on notice that they may need to add.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the introduction and for having raised the issue of rebalancing between design and implementation. Ula just raised some point, and he just said that it would be good if the IFA staff can focus on design and implementation on the other side. I tend to disagree with this approach. To me, design should be driven by the countries. There are countries where the design can even be done by the nationals. You take the Chinas in West Africa, for instance, Nigeria. To me, the design process is really country-driven. When you have good technical people in the countries, they can do the design. And if I would just do the appraisal, let's just take the private sector. You have a project. You go to a bank. You need resources. You build your own project, and then you come to the bank. All the bank does is make sure that you can you have a good project and you can reimburse the resources. So I think we need to shift completely from design to implementation. This is where we can make impact. Implementation used to have some resources in the past, as just Thomas said, but we have just now almost half of those resources. If we really want to make a big impact in the field, I think this is where we need to focus our attention. Because my experience is design is probably 15% of the success of the project. The remaining depends on implementation, particularly having a good team that manages the project. This is where we need to put more emphasis. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Abdul. So we'll try and give a few responses and take another round, and then we'll come into the room here. Paul, do you want to kick off?
Sure.
You can always phone a friend. I see Thariah sitting in the second row.
On the consultation process for IFED 2.0, so in the first stage there was very little. And part of that was because there were just ideas that had to be thought out. So things like the Impact Fund were, it was something that the president had talked about. Other people had asked the president, including some foundations, about the possibility of us doing something like this. And so in effect, he asked to go find information from other sources, ideas, and just put something down on paper. And in doing that, I was doing a lot of that, and we talked to individual staff to ask questions. But it wasn't until after we went to the board that we felt comfortable actually talking about a lot of these things, because they could have easily said no. And so the idea before the retreat was to throw out some ideas that we were thinking of, and to get the board on board. In effect, what the board said afterwards was, these ideas are good enough, we're interested in letting you explore, meaning get into some of the details. And so that's what we're doing now, and that's now that we're having a more consultative process. So the papers have been divided into those groups, and there's a set that SKD and PMD are working on. So there's a group representing SKD and PMD that are working on the papers linked to the impact fund, the private sector window, the mission vision that has to be written, a whole bunch of smaller components like how do we do EFED 2.0 at the country level, and the group, different people have different jobs within that. So it's a group, I forget, 12, 13 people. And not only that, coming up with a new name for the impact fund, because nobody likes the names I come up with. So now Kareem's given the accelerator fund, so we'll see how that goes. So we are consulting on this now, and so it's been the main issue I find is that the speed by which this has to be done. So I sent, or all of us sent drafts of the documents to the group yesterday, so that we get comments back on Friday. So we get 2 whole days to work on this, while everyone has their day jobs, and then I and others will work over the weekend to have it done by Monday. And so part of the problem with the consultation is more the speed at which things are going, than not giving opportunity. It's hard with the time people have to be able to give substantive input. I hope that the next draft that comes in August will provide a little more time for people to give some more substantive input on how this might work. In terms of the few comments on SKD priorities, so as I said, our intention is to try to analyze the situation now. And then what we'll do is we'll come up with, where we think priorities should be, design versus others, and then we'll discuss it at PMC. So we need to make it clear we have limited constraints, so we need to talk with you about it. And we've heard some ideas of where those priorities should be, but that's something we need to talk about. I would emphasize the importance of design. In the impact assessments that we did, I can tell you that in a number of cases, I looked at projects and I knew right away there was going to be no impact, because the theory of change made no sense. So usually what we did is we focused on the part where we thought there would be an impact, because programs were often so much like a Christmas tree of all these different things that we knew that there was parts that there was no way you would have a measurable impact. You might have little impacts here and there, but you're not going to have anything substantive like increased production, greater market access. So getting it right at the beginning, is important. So I do think that's an important thing to worry about. Then the last comment is on the DRM, and I forget who said it. Someone said something about the key issues. I think it maybe was Ulach. And I think that's very important to do that. I find the comments at these different stages of OCDRM to be all over the place. And I sometimes feel like the team should say, no, this isn't the main priority here. But it's very hard to do that if you don't have a clear guidance of what are the issues that have to be covered. Now, I know a lot of you don't like the development effectiveness matrix, but that was the idea of that. And I've seen it in other institutions when people gave comments in the equivalence of DRM, and they held up, a similar kind of checklist and said, no, I don't have to do that. It's not on the list. If it's not on this list, I don't have to do it. And that's true. That's how it should be if it worked properly. Unfortunately, from my understanding, it's not working properly. And as Donald mentioned, it clearly needs to be adjusted. But if we could get it right, it should be the clear menu. This is what you have to do and nothing else. And so if other comments come in, you can say, no, I'm not doing that. Now, we all need to be aligned in that. So it means that we all have to agree what those key issues are. And QUAG has to agree what those key issues are and not give comments that are outside that view. And so if we can get to that point, it could work quite well. And currently, it's just muddled along and it's not being used very well. So then it's not useful. But I do think we need to think about using something like that to make sure the key issues are there.
Thanks. So maybe I'll pick up sort of two or three groups of comments together. There was some around the budget process. So as I say, in fact, I think maybe last night in my inbox there's the official first sort of memo from OSB. But over the next couple of days we'll be getting that, and it's coming to the EMC for discussion next week. But as I said, there is a lot we can do now, and certainly we'll be sending something out today or tomorrow, and we're discussing it, in fact, at the PDMT after this, because we want to maximise the amount of time available to get it right, and ensure, and I've said that to OSB, that we need time, if we're going to do this properly, to be able to look at what comes back from hubs and triangulate that and give you some feedback and continue, because as I say, this is rightly cross-departmental, not just sitting in departments, which adds a level of complexity, but really should be where we're at. So we'll be sending something out, very quickly. We've spent the last 2 weeks working with SKD, with FMD, with CDI, with OSB to try and ensure that, as I say, the principles behind the budgeting process that starts from hub planning and is not sort of an add-on, are the way we try and do it. And I think we're more or less there. We had another meeting yesterday. But I would say on budgets and a little bit what I've heard about, design and supervision budgets and other things, that, we also need to challenge ourselves here. What I've noticed across EFAD as a newcomer is that there are different approaches in different offices and different divisions, and I think one of the things we're trying to do, through the whole process of OPEX, is to try and ensure that there is a sort of a set of standards and behaviours across EFAD that doesn't depend on which division you work in or which office or who your manager is. And there's certainly been a tendency in some places where we have everyone in the kitchen sink in the design or the supervision process. Part of decentralization is to get us nearer to our partners and to the projects. So you don't necessarily have to have 12 people on a supervision mission because that's what we always did, and we have one of each. And so we need to challenge ourselves a little bit about how, what's good enough. We've all in our past lives and operations, have been a sort of a practitioner, self-made expert in things. You don't have to. So I think that there is a culture and behavior issue across certain bits of EFAD that we do need to challenge in the way we do things, and ensure we don't just sort of contract everything out in this process, and it's a consultant for everything. Actually, for me, the key thing here, and the same as in design, and it goes to the questions we've had about, the role of SKD staff, the role of the PTL, the CD, etc., etc. Country directors do not have enough time in certainly busy countries with increasing budgets to be, but for me, they have to have, and the same with the staff from SKD. EFAD has to take responsibility for the design, for the key decisions, for the direction of that design, and we need to use staff strategically in that context and know, where that direction, that expertise, or those decisions need to come from, versus where, there are some very clear but often quite basic work that needs to be done and where we can contract that out. But what we shouldn't be doing is contracting out the strategic and the direction. And actually, and I'm afraid, Abdul, I disagree with you. I do not see, I see all this as a partnership between EFAD and governments, both in design and implementation, but it is a partnership. And where there is stronger capacity from government, we can step back more. Where there's weaker, we have to step in more. And that's in design and supervision. But I do take your point that in some places it almost it runs itself. But as I say, and as I said earlier, it's not good enough to tell me this has been a problem project for 3 years and it's all government's fault. Actually, it's our fault as well. So I think, it's this partnership and getting that balance right, and it depends a lot on the capacity and the context. And just on UN reform, in fact, a draft memo came out 2 days ago, which, as you said, Thomas, for me was a little bit too New York driven, and our response to it. And we need to look at where the space is within what we have to do and what's practical, particularly in agencies like IFAD, where, you know, this is not IFAD's money sitting there to be allocated as we see fit. This is government's money, and we're following government's agenda. And I have had a few quite sobering conversations with some of the resident coordinators where they've sort of said to me, well, we want IFAD to do this, this, and this. And it's like, well, actually, the world doesn't work like that. And we've got to find a way. So I'm sort of, you know, where there's good RCs, you know, it will be a lot easier, but I think there will be quite an education process about understanding what we do, how we do it, the role of government, how that can fit into the whole UN direction in a country, you know, what's possible and what's not possible. And, you know, and that's the key thing we need to get right. So your points about, you know, things being passed the RCs, I mean, I think comments fine. They may have views. We'll look at them. We'll take them on board where they're useful. But obviously, if they're clearly taking us away from government's ownership and direction and gender and what they want, you know, we need to get that balance right. But as I say, it's something that's quite high on my agenda now, as I think the talking is starting to stop in New York and the doing is starting to happen at country level. Okay. Let's take one more round if there are a show of hands out there, and then I want to come into the room. So anyone want to wave? And as I say, please, I would like to hear from PMI, ECG, FMD staff out there as well. This is a sort of a family conversation. Okay, well, I'll come to this room while you decide if you're brave enough to wave. So I'm sure there's people in this room that would be very happy to question, comment, issues. Dina.
Thanks, Donald, and thanks, Paul, for this opportunity. I think it's really important for us to have these conversations. I'd like to echo some of the points that were made without repeating them. One of the things that being now in the field, it seems like we don't really have more time to conceptualize, process, and act. It's almost like we're under heavy artillery fire coming from headquarters, always having, it's a fast-paced, changing environment that we're in, and in IFAD, for the last 2 years, we've had so many processes, so many policies, and there's all these tensions because you're trying to comply, you're trying to adapt to the change, but at the same time, you know, you just can't cope physically with all the demands that are coming up, and we don't even have time to process the new requirements. That's one point. The second, I think, was said on the budget and the resources, and thank you, Donald, for raising the importance of implementation. One of the things that it's very hard now to attract good consultants to IFAD. Consultants who are experienced, who with the recalibrated project design process, it's a shorter time, demands are more, and we're not even compensating them enough. So most consultants, experienced ones, are actually now, you know, basically turning down our offers to do designs for us. So we're pushing quality, we're pushing on demands and requirements, and at the same time, we're not compensating fairly. And the other point is also some of the policies that have been introduced in terms of, you know, the timings and all, as I was saying. If you look at the review process, and I think it was already said by Ulach and Thomas, we have literally, within the 9-month design process or 8-month design process, if you count the number of days that we have literally to prepare the projects, it boils down to almost like 2.5 months. The rest of the time is we're trying to meet the reviewers' comments. We're trying to, you know, internalize the requirements. So we don't really have time really to prepare properly the designs. So I'd really like to call upon management to think about, because if we have to have 16 days lead time, each time we have to present the documentation, and then internally as well, we have another 10 days lead time to submit, and then we have SEC, and then we have all these deadlines. We just cannot make it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. More hands in the room? Wonderful.
Thank you, Donald. Thank you, Paul, for this opportunity. It's really good to meet and discuss some of the key issues. I think I would like to go to one point, which is the hub plans. You mentioned the budgeting and the hub plans, and I think these are the starting point for everything that we could harmonize and do together, because the budget stems basically from these plans, and the way we built it in NAN, for example, the hub plans are articulated around detailed tables that we build. So I think we need to do a little bit more of working together on the plans, preparing them, because they seem a little bit PMD-centric at the moment, and we have been struggling with this at the beginning. But I would like also to highlight that the hub plans are a very good tool, in my view, to improve the partnership. It's there, the template is good, we just need to work it out more together. I would like to second what colleagues said on the supervision budget, and I think this is becoming really an important issue for us. Donald, you mentioned that the quality of or the delivery of the IFAD 11 projects would depend on what we do today with supervisions. We're addressing the problem projects, the projects at risk, etc. And for that, because we are getting less money at the moment, I think some rough estimations, we are like 20-30% below what we would need for each supervision vision, more or less, according to what I see in Morocco at least. Maybe colleagues have different figures in other countries. And it will depend also on countries, like I think Dina was saying, because it depends really, it cannot be standardized, because maybe a country like China would need more money than a country like Tunisia, or I don't know. So it's basically has to be seen case by case. I think these are the two main points I'd like to make now. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's try and see if there's one more in the room. Well, it's Thursday. If it was Monday, I could understand why everyone was quiet, but this is Thursday. I know Paul's very scary and I'm not, but you can talk up. It looks like we're for a full house of Nen here. Khalida's got her one. I just want to say, actually, we're in a Nen bit, so if Khalida could have it. I have just been on mission with Khalida. Her arm in a sling is absolutely nothing to do with me and the mission. Before, I know how rumours start in IFAD. I have nothing to do with it, and I hope Khalid is not about to accuse me of it.
Donald, you stole my line. I want to say, don't travel with Donald, because then you finish the mission injured. No, maybe I wanted to say a few things. One thing that we didn't mention is how we are competitive. Dina touched upon it for consultants, but also for staffing. Lately, because I'm acting hub head for Turkey, in addition to be director, we were supposed to interview 5 people, 4 dropped. Because we were not giving enough salaries. So this is also something that needs to be considered. On the IFAD 2 consultation, I wanted maybe to react. We had an IMT last week, it was, I think, two half days of IMTs, and also as directors, we raised the issue of consultation, not only the consultation internally, but among our clients, because it has to be demand-driven. And so far, in assessing the demand, it was focusing on the World Bank. The World Bank assessment, Paul, if I remember. We discussed, and I think the president was very supportive to have regional consultations among countries to better assess and refine the demand. The other thing, I mean, we talked about reviewing the process. There is a lot of fine-tuning that is needed for the new design process. I mean, recently, for example, how to estimate the climate change financing. There are a lot of things. And also, we used to have, for those of you who were here before, we had each session QUAG review and lessons learned. So maybe Now we have DRM and OSC throughout the year, but this is something to be considered and to learn from what happened, if we improved quality, how many projects were sent back for redesign, etc. Donald, you mentioned the budget for non-staff, I guess. What about the staff budget? You remember that many of the hubs were asking for admin support, and we got extra budget, but not regular budget, not regular position. So where do we stand on that? For us also, we were recently decentralized, and we have the benefit of having PMI and ECG in Cairo hub, and it made a difference in terms of working together because we are closer, but also on saving money on design. Both, for example, Dina's design in Egypt is very competitive. The cost was very low compared to other years. But one thing that we need to think about is also to clarify roles and responsibilities, because you mentioned PTLs, but there are PTS and PTLs. There are country directors and country directors. We need to clarify roles and responsibility. Is it a joint product? And if it's not joint product, we should go together with Thoraya to define the project. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, now we've had the NEN corner, we should probably answer them and then we'll move on. Okay, so let me just pick up a few of these. I suppose, and they're all good points that we've been hearing this morning, and some of them we're going to take away because we don't have answers, and some of them we might have, well, we don't have answers, we might have a response. So the time issue, I think, is important, but I think there are things we can do to help ourselves. What I've noticed, and maybe it's sitting there chairing and seeing the whole range of stuff coming through, some people come, as I say, to sort of fire the starting gun, and pretty well everything is to be done in the future. And some people come with a pretty well-formed idea, quite a lot of the groundwork already done. So to me, it's kind of like training for a race. Once the race starts, the clock starts ticking, but you can do a lot of training for that race. And I get two sorts: people that have done a lot of training and people that think you can rock up for the marathon and you can complete 26 miles with no training and do it in under 3 hours. And we can do quite a lot. So there is, my advice is do a lot of the homework, or as much as you can before you do it. I agree with you on deadlines and things. I mean, I'm still trying to get my head around what's negotiable, what's not negotiable. And part of the reason I was flagging that I want to have a look at this design process now, and the review particularly, is to see what's adding value, what we strip out, what we can do to improve this sort of thing, because and in that context, everyone is sort of running to catch up with all the changes in EFAD. So it's clear, while we've agreed to really front load this year, there's no additional staffing in QAG. So QAG rightly come to us and say, in June, we're supposedly meant to review, 32 project design documents, 5 cost ops and so on, and they just don't have the capacity. I keep saying, well, we will help you with capacity, because the thing is, what we can't do is the night before a meeting suddenly get the QAG comments, which we have to respond to. And, we do have instances almost of that, but it's not QAG's fault. So we need to look at the whole system and see it from other people's perspectives, not just our own, and work out where the pinch points are, how we can do it, and, similarly with SEC and their deadlines too. I think there is a negotiation and everything here, but, I couldn't believe quite what QAG's workload was and how few people were in it. These are things we can sort out, at least this year, when we've got an enormous amount of front loading, and we need to be able to do that. And, and probably the other thing I also say is, if necessary, we're going to have to prioritize. And if everything can't get through, we have to take some of that pressure off ourselves, all of us, and say, actually, it's just not possible to do that this year. And this wider issue about time, that's not just about design and thinking. I think there is a real issue of prioritization in EFAD, and we've got to get much better at it. I think there is an issue that I probably make myself unpopular at the centre is trying to remind people that those people in the field, you know, what it feels like to be in the field, BU, SKD, PMD, whatever, and that you have very busy day jobs, and HQ needs to think more before they push stuff outwards. And the way it's been explained to me, you know, the way I look at it, pre-decentralisation, it was a lot easier when most of your staff were sitting at headquarters with the amount of stuff that comes down to find people to distribute it to. Now that's also going on out the field. So we need to think again about what we do, how we do it in these contexts. You know, we need to challenge ourselves from the EMC and OPV downwards. You know, one of the things I get a lot of is, you know, is requests for visits and so on. A lot of work going into them to busy people at, you know, at hub level, and then suddenly, well, actually, we're not going. That's just, you know, we need to be really clear when we're commissioning visits that they're really going to happen before the work happens, and then, you know, and also the government expectations attached to it. Supervision budget. I hear a lot on hub plans, and thank you, Nufel, for that. And for me, we do need to do it together. I mean, this is one of the reasons Paul and SKD have been working so hard to try and get us a list of PTLs and ECG focal points in the process, because of course one of the problems we had last year was we didn't know who to talk to. But the new process is very clearly joint ownership but accountability between the country director and the PTL. So you need to be able to get agreement on a budget, you know, between them. But that's why we now have names. You know, as Paul said, it may be unrealistic as we move forward to think that a PTL for 7 projects in 2020 is really realistic, but we'll adjust that as we go. But in the meantime, we at least have someone to talk to and sign off on a budget process. And I think the other difference for me from last year was we did have so many vacancies across the board. You know, many of the hub slots were not filled. We now, by and large, have them there. So, you know, you can have proper conversations at hub level as individuals, cross departments, in teams, and we can do a lot of, which is why the hub plan's even more important this year. Supervision budgets, you know, I sort of take the point, but maybe OPR, Lauren, Jill could say a little point on that, because IOE are saying that, you know, that there's a massive decrease in supervision budgets. But when we've been trying to find the evidence, and let's talk evidence, not, you know, what we think, it's pretty difficult to find the evidence. They may totally tell me I'm wrong now, but the last I did before I went to Kyrgyzstan and Khalida tried to push me down the stairs was that actually there is no strong evidence to say that the budgets have decreased. But my point is more, you know, there's a formal supervision process, and then there's a continuous supervision process. And this is where I'd like to challenge cultures and behaviors. You know, I am surprised at times when I hear some people say, yeah, you know, we meet the project director once every 6 months, or when we're doing the formal supervision mission. Actually, you know, if we're in country in hubs and we're traveling there more regularly, we should be having more continuous contact. So that doesn't mean you have to have formal missions with 10 people on it. That may mean you're sitting there having a meeting and checking through things on a more regular basis. So I think there is an issue about how we do things as well as how much they cost in there. I take the point on competitiveness, whether it's for consultants or whether it's for staff, and it's one of the things the President has been looking at. My challenge in there is we have quite a lot of flexibility already in our systems. The question is, are we using that flexibility properly? And the point about admin staff and 2020 budgets, it is something, as you say, we've been clear the whole way along, you know, that this needs a structural solution, not just some money to tide us over. And, you know, and that was, from my perspective, the agreement in 2019 was it was recognised we couldn't address it structurally at that point, but this should be part of the 2020 budget process. and that was my main point yesterday back to OSB, is that this has to be there because we have to have the right sort of admin support for all our staff to be effective. And I take your point on roles and responsibilities. I think this is work in progress across the board. In fact, only last week I signed off on the new sort of generic terms for regional economists. We haven't done for portfolio advisors. It's for everything. It's for PTLs versus country directors around design, and we won't solve everything overnight, but we need to keep doing it, Paul.
Just a couple small things. On the competitiveness, that is part of that paper that I said about HR, is to consider whether our salary scale is the appropriate one for an international financial institution. So whether we're able to try to do that. I understand Canayo tried at one point and unsuccessfully, but maybe with a little more analysis, we can argue that's the case. And on the EFAD 2.0 consultation that you mentioned, I'm glad to hear you say that because I wasn't at that Interact, so it's good to know. I do, one of the tricky things with consultation is you have to have something to consult about. And so you have to have ideas that you're putting out there. And to be quite frank, a lot of when I talk about the different elements of EFAD 2.0, I mostly get questions. With the assumption that I'm going to somehow answer them and answer everything and have it all laid out. If people don't give me suggestions, that is what will happen in many of these things because, we and management do have to write it out. So these different windows are almost certainly going to happen one way or another because there's funding out there that we think we can tap, mostly outside of our own donors, as well as targeted funds, we think, in climate finance, maybe in gender, et cetera. So the money's out there and we think we can tap it one way or the other. The question is what are we going to sell to do that? We can't sell it in our core because the foundations really can't put it in there. So we can sell it in these other things. The question is what do we sell? And that's what we're trying to do right now. And so suggestions on how that should evolve is important, and I'd like to hear them. But as I said, a lot of times I get questions, not suggestions. So it'd be very helpful to get suggestions as we're going forward.
I think Lauren or Jill were going to just talk a bit about supervision budgets and what we've dug up.
Yeah, we're going to have a little discussion at PDMT with the data that we found. It sounds like it will be a robust discussion because the evidence from the region seems to be different than what we found in the corporate systems. But overall, there has not been a decline in the average amount of money allocated for supervision. There has been a decline in the number of projects, and there was a dip around 2014, but it's basically recovered since then, and it goes a bit up and down. And neither the amount allocated nor the amount spent has gone down significantly according to the corporate level data. So that's just to sort of say that it is an issue, that we're aware that people have this feeling, so we need to understand why there's this perception of such a dramatic decrease. No, I think people were saying that it has halved. So we have to see, because the data doesn't show that at the corporate level for any of the divisions, in fact.
And maybe that's a good plug for why data is so important. And, it was the same when we were trying to construct the 2019 budget more generally. We all have a duty to ensure that data, be it norms or whatever, is there. But also on the budget side of things, it's almost impossible to work out what we spend on what. So we need to properly, this is not a policeman, but if we can't work out basic costs because we're not tracking the money properly, so if budgets are being switched, they need to be properly coded so we understand what that switch is for, so that we can really get to some of these things. But currently, there's no way you can go and talk to the board or anyone else if the data doesn't support it. And the data needs to be able to support it. So we all need to get much, much better at data. It's not just about RIA and impact. It's about just basic budgeting and so on across the board. Because without the data and the evidence, it's pretty difficult. They're myths. They're not truths unless we can prove them. Okay, so let's get Thoraya.
Thank you very much, Donald. Actually, a lot has been said, but maybe start with a positive note, because when I sit and hear this kind of discussion, I also remember that despite all the challenges, this decentralization, the high vacancy rate we managed to deliver. So we should all be proud of this because it has been quite challenging. I had 4 points actually that I wanted to mention. The first one is about, I mean, very often I sit in this meeting and I hear our colleagues from PMD expressing how difficult it's for them to deliver. And I get the point. It's extremely difficult. You're under pressure. But sometimes I also feel that we are not getting the full picture in the sense that it's also very difficult for the support divisions, including for a division like PMI, to provide the necessary support for them to deliver. And one of the challenges that I wanted to mention was the reaction that we get sometimes now from country directors and regional directors, because obviously, I mean, I have people who have 8, 9 projects, and sometimes, I mean, we had the situation where when the person had 6 projects moving at the same time. The only option that we were able to put on the table was to hire consultants who would act as alter ego, and that was very negatively perceived by the team, saying, oh, you're giving me a consultant. So I just wanted to emphasize that it's difficult for everybody, so we need to work together, and the only way of doing it is to establish very clear communication and also have better signs, or how to say, about the needs. So if you have a project that is in a conflict situation that is complicated, please say so that we can also try to prioritize the needs that we receive. So that's the first one. Second, Khalida said something very important, which is there are PTLs and PTS and there are CDs and CDs. And I want to actually emphasize this point. I feel that now that we are completing the decentralization, we need to look back and see what needs to be done to allow actually these teams to better do their role. So maybe that could require reconsideration of the role of hub directors, because I feel that they are still also requested to do projects for the country they cover. There's also the issue of leadership. You can be a very, very technical, very good technical person, but you're not necessarily a very good manager. So these are things that we need to look at, and I hope that we will start building them to actually get more from this decentralization. Third, the supervision, and I fully agree with you. I mean, we need to start thinking of doing things differently, leverage on the decentralization, but also, and we had a discussion yesterday about it, try to be more strategic, have a risk-based approach to the supervision. If you have a plain vanilla project that is working properly, you have a strong project management unit, maybe you don't need to put the same resources to supervise than a project that has difficulties. And last is the role of PMI director. It's something that I keep hearing. I think Lissandra was the one who brought it up. As a director of PMI, the first time that I get to see the project document is at the OSC or the GRM. So I don't get to see it before. So we can always say, if we want to go together, I need to see it before. But chances are we will create another bottleneck. And I mean, hearing Dean and other colleagues, I don't think it's something that. So the approach has been to say, if this is like a serious quality control, we stop it. But otherwise, as a director, I go to these meetings and they provide comments that I believe could improve the quality of the document. Usually, I will never attack or say this is bad, but just to say this is how we can improve it. And I keep hearing these comments, so if we can think of another way of envisaging so that we can go together, define the project, it's fine. But we need to find this right balance between the need to move and deliver and the need to ensure also that people also provide comment as part of the quality control. Thanks.
Thanks, Thoraya. And actually, I would like to re-emphasize your point, which comes up actually quite a lot, that PMD can do a much, much better job, as I've dug into this, identifying PTLs and what's in, about being much clearer on the type of project it is, what you think the issues are, so you can look a lot, you can be a lot clearer about the sort of PTL that's needed. But if we don't provide information bar the name of a project almost sometimes, it's so we have a duty to be much clearer. I mean, timelines will always change, things will happen, but we need to plan better and we need to give you more information in that process, so I totally agree with you on that. I always say you need to look at something from the other person's point of view rather than just your own one. And I do know that a lot of the information that comes through doesn't really help you. Okay, so one or two more, and then please, Sarah.
For the design phase, just a recommendation based on the results of the impact assessment, and as Paul said, I don't want to say I would invest less in the design, because actually because we're saying the opposite. But the true thing is that I would be more, it's difficult to find the right word. Maybe the word I would like to use is concise. Because if you make a project for the future more concise or more focused, with more interlinked activities and less diversified activities, maybe it will reduce the time of all the process and for the comments, because it's more focused, and this will speed up the process for approval. Because really we found in our impact assessment that there was a variety of component, and this also means that the comments that, I mean, from the practical point of view, if you have many components, you have many comments. You have to address many comments, and you have to slow down the process. So just this.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you very much. And having come recently to the organization, I really welcome your review of the project design process. And I guess the question is, we're going to also start to have ORMs play a much more, I guess, central role in the project design and the process. And I look forward to that, because just one indication of how I think things can be improved is we were just informed that just because the regional director didn't actually sign something, like a memo, a draft memo, that it's being held up. And I think that if the ORM system, we can use that process to speed things up, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I know WCA are probably the greatest client of the design process at the moment. We got some, yeah. I'll give Paul a go, and then we'll kick one quick round again. You don't get a second chance until everyone's had a first chance. I'll just warn you, looking at hands. Okay, so Paul, come back, and then we'll move to Kenya.
First, on the signing, I find it absurd we have to sign anything in 2019. There's digital means of signing that other places did 10 years ago. Even the university, which was totally backward in technology, let us sign things electronically. So we should refuse to sign anything until they allow us to do it digitally. I mostly want to comment on the bunching issue that Taraya raised. That it is complicated, and I think it's also complicated by the fact that our missions, from my understanding, are much longer than other places. We had this issue when I worked at the Inter-American Development Bank. We constantly were emailing each other, trying to figure out how we could sequence. I was at their headquarters. I flew to the field. I constantly had this issue of sequencing things. But we had week-long missions almost always. So as long as we could find a week, and we would literally send an email saying, here's the 5 weeks I can go over in the next 4 months, and then we'd find coincidence. But our missions being longer, because we go to the field, is what I understand the big difference is. And that's why it takes more time. But it does make it very hard, and I've heard from a number of SKD members about this issue of they want to go. It's not that. It's that this timing issue is very hard. And so it might mean at times that people can go for parts of missions and to try to figure out how we can manage that. And then what Sarah's point on being concise and focused, I really think that's an important aspect of designing a project. These little components here and there don't work. And I don't think simple is the right word. I don't think we want simple projects, because you can go do rural finance, but all you're going to get out of that is a slightly lower risk reduction, et cetera, because the evidence doesn't tell you that takes you out of poverty. But focused is a good way to do it, and it'll help make things get more clear results that you're after.
Thanks. And I think just on this bunching as well, I mean, this has been an exceptional year, not because we're trying to do so much in a year where there's also so much change and consolidation. But I don't think at the start of the year any of us could have foreseen the DSF issue, which therefore meant a whole bunch of projects were having to be pushed back because we couldn't get agreement on the financing terms. So hopefully that will get sorted. I just wanted to sort of agree strongly with, I think, a lot of the points Thuraya also made about, about leadership, and what we expect from hub heads, etc., but leadership more generally in management. And, a good technical person is not always a good leader, even of a design mission as a PTL, and we need to try and get that. And to me, one of my key things coming in here has been trying hard to see, or to try and help strengthen leadership and management skills. Obviously, starting in PMD, we've had two hub head retreats, but actually attached to both have been sort of leadership and management training, because we need to do more of that. I think IFAD's been very strong technically, but we need to continue to build, because until now it's been very, very flat, and we need to build this decentralized leadership and management, including, as I say, for team leaders, for everything, and focus on that. And again, and linked to that, as I've said a couple of times, I think we need to think through again performance and performance management, and what it looks like, and help people in that process. What should they be doing? Are they doing it? Do they have the skills to do it? Because actually part of this process is where we have varying performance. It puts a lot of stress and additional work on other people too. And in many ways, we're into a sort of a new IFAD here. It's not just about decentralization. It's not just about a new business model. But I think the skills, the behaviors, etc., are also part of that evolution, and we need to help and support and think through that. And I think the IMT tomorrow is going to look at a lot of those sort of more people-centered issues. And I couldn't agree more. Like Paul, I was waiting to see what word you used, Sarah. I had written down focused. You said concise, and then I think you came to focus. And it does seem to me that that's the key for us in terms of, what are the really essential bits? And as Paul said, if you don't have a good theory of change, if you haven't got clear indicators, so actually we have no idea what it is we're trying to measure, if you're not clear on the targeting, so there's just some very basic essentials that we need to focus on. And make sure that's there, and not overrule it. Okay, so Kenya, please.
Thank you, Donald and Paul. I think it's been a really interesting conversation, and just in the light of openness, I'd like to say I think processes, whether they're design, supervision, or internal, are really good. They're very helpful in getting things done, especially in a decentralized environment. I think where we're seeing those differences are amongst those people that have come from different divisions. And then you see that when a process becomes a constraining factor, it also becomes something that is a deterrent in a process. So just to say that I think there are CDs and CDs for sure, but I think there's an accountability also that's within the process. And I hope that management recognizes that we all function within our purview of accountabilities. Thanks.
Thank you. Can anyone see anyone else waving bar Ulash? No, I'm not coming to you yet, Ulash. Anyone, any other office? And Vietnam. Well, Thomas, you had 3 goes at the beginning, I think, all rolled up into one. Anyone else in the room who hasn't spoken?
Did we introduce a quota?
Yeah, we have for you. Anyone else in the room? Okay, I'll go back to Ulash and to Thomas quickly. Then we'll wrap up, because I always like to reward people. So I think this is due to go on to 11. So if we can finish by 22, I recommend you all go and get a cup of coffee wherever you are, rather than just go straight back to your emails, or a cup of tea or dinner, whatever it is. So Ulash, you were first. Thomas, please be concise. You've spoken once.
Okay, very quickly. Thank you very much. I think on budget execution and budgeting, Donald, you said that it's so important to do the budgeting right. I think that's right, but it is even more important and much easier to just enter the right budget codes when you execute the budget, and this should give you the exact visibility where the money went. Because so far I have never seen a process where actually our budget proposal was fully taken into account. So we have to then juggle and use the budget slightly differently than it has been allocated. But this is fully visible when we enter the right budget codes in execution. So I don't really understand where the problem is. Secondly, on innovative ways to address bad performance, for example, for ongoing projects. I fully agree with you. Sometimes it's just a meeting. But, you know, we have also a lot of prescriptive guidance that we are getting. For example, a problem project should have 2 full supervision missions, which I think is a complete waste of resources. If I know what the issues are, why don't I rather have 2 follow-up missions focusing on the issues rather than wasting my resources on doing another full supervision and complying with all the questions that are being asked in our supervision report. So I think we can give the country teams more flexibility to sort these things out. And this flexibility I also request for this conversation that you're preparing for CDs and PTLs and PTLs. All these conversations, I think, have to happen on the ground within the teams, and this gives us ownership and makes this whole question about accountability hopefully irrelevant in the future. Thank you.
Thomas.
I'm okay. I waive my input.
Go on, you're allowed to. Quickly.
I'm not allowed to. Okay, quickly. On the design, I can agree with what the audience said. Clear a theory of change, clear indicators, focus project. That's what we are trying over the last years, many last years, and we are getting better by the year, I suppose. But design reality is complex, and the reality of our target group is complex. Look at, maybe, I don't know IDB, but look at World Bank and ADB. Their design processes are very similar. Their volume is very similar in terms of agriculture. Maybe that should be used as a benchmark. Thank you.
Thank you. So just quickly, on the budget, Ulash, if you look, and we did last year as we were trying to look at unit costs, you may be the shining example of best practice in IFAD in Ethiopia, but a large amount of budget you will see when it gets switched, which we have no problem with, ends up having dummy codes put in it. So it's actually very unclear what it's being used for. You know, you're never going to get the whole budget that you want. So we have no problem with people actually looking at how they reallocate budget to meet priorities. The point is that therefore that then when it's moved, it needs to be properly coded, and what's been happening, I think the dummy code is 9999 or something. And if you've not got enough to do, we'll send you last year's budget and you can count up how many 9999s are in it, but I'm sure none are from Ethiopia. And then the second point, I'm not sure what you're reading, and we're obviously communicating very badly. But as far as I'm aware, and maybe I've missed it, there is nothing that's come out saying you need 2 full supervision missions a year for problem projects. What it should say, I will ask Jill or someone to, and if it doesn't say that, then we'll rewrite it. But you may need to look again at what we did say. So maybe on that point, Jill or Khalida or Nigel can actually say what we have asked for.
Thank you very much. In fact, what we do say is 2 supervision missions, but one should be a full supervision mission. The second should be a partial one, targeted at the issues that are causing the project to be a chronic problem project or a problem project. So it's not saying you have to have 2 full-blown supervision missions. It's at least 1. The point is that in both cases, you would be recording your findings in the system, which will help us track what your actions are and how you're taking proactivity to resolve them. Thanks.
Thank you. So if it wasn't clear in what we sent out to you, Ulash, hopefully it is now, but that was my understanding of it. The second one is very targeted on the issues that are causing the problem. So please look again, and if it's not clear, we will reissue it. With that, you have 23 minutes of your life back for whatever you want to do. And I'm just going to hand over to Paul to close. But please take the opportunity to talk to your colleagues or have a coffee.
Just to note, I do think there's a couple follow-ups that we should do based on this conversation. The first, on the EFAD 2.0, we need to make sure that people are getting information, consulted, et cetera. So I'll take that on board, and I'll find specifically what I assume the president said at that meeting. I also think on the review process, it shouldn't be this bad. It shouldn't be this complicated. So we need to figure out how to, again, I can't remember if it was Ulash, the key issues. What are the key things that need to be in these documents, and try to get rid of the rest? And I think that requires not, the worst thing is to not know what's expected of you and to go, and then people ask all these questions that you never thought you had to answer. And so we should be clear at the very beginning, what are the questions you have to answer in the documents, and so there's no ambiguity. Then you go there, and when people ask other questions, you say, no, I don't have to answer that question. And all of the stages, and I think that's part of the problem. So if we can try to figure out what those key issues are, maybe through the development effectiveness matrix, and fix the process around that because it's not working, then it would make life a little easier. But I think it's something that we need to talk about over the next couple months so it makes this process a little easier.
And we will obviously quickly move on the budgeting process, starting at the hub level and above. And I think there was also a set of very useful comments about, as Paul and Thoraya have talked about, and as we're keen to have that conversation at PMC about what we should and shouldn't expect from different people, in design missions and supervision, be they country directors, be they PTLs or others, and trying to make best use of a limited resource. So thank you all. Thank you for your time. Thank you all the officers and hubs for phoning in, and look forward to continuing dialogue. And if there's anything you want to send on that you haven't asked, please do so. Cheers.